Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 30th of August of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk again about the Pokrovsk agglomeration, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. As we know, the Russians are tasked to secure and to take under complete control the cities of Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, most likely to take under control the villages of Rodinska, Belitsk and Dobropolye. The Russians launched their offensive operation in this direction approximately on the 8th of August, and almost every single day since that date we've been receiving updates that we use to adjust the map, mainly in Russian favor. Once again, this is the situation by the end of the 8th of August, and this is approximately the moment when the Russians launched their offensive, and this is exactly the day when we got first report that the Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group managed to break through Ukraine defense and to get as deep as possible. And another important thing that I would like to point to attention is that when talking about the 30th of August of 2025, for the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything about this direction. So I'm talking about, first of all, about changes on the ground. So there are two different types of changes on the ground. The changes that were confirmed by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, or at least by geolocation, by this or that geolocation published by either pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian source. And we have talks, rumors, and different changes on maps that were provided by different experts. And these changes mainly concerns progress on the ground of the sabotage and reconnaissance group. So this is very important, and we need to understand the difference. And I would like to point to attention that during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received even a single update that was provided by more or less reliable resource that the sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, who are currently attacking Ukraine positions in this direction, have improved their positions. So no changes. We have just small corrections in the area of the settlement by the name of Krasny Liman. Several mappers reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions, but we believe that it's just adjustment of map of other sources of information that was provided by other sources. And in the northern direction, we have additional two changes or adjustments on the map in the vicinity of Zolotoy Kolodets and Kucherev Yar. And that's it. So once again, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 11th of August of 2025. This is the situation by the end of the 12th of August. The Russians managed to improve their positions 2 times more in comparison with the 11th of August. And when talking about the 30th of August, we have no changes. And the question is, what is happening right now? So there might be lots of answers to these questions. Maybe the Russians stopped, maybe the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation, or maybe the Russians during the previous days managed to improve their position significantly, mainly by sabotage and reconnaissance group. The Russians took under control the edge positions to the north, let's say, of the city of Pokrovsk, and of course to the south of the settlement of Dobropolye. The Russians took under control supply lines, the Russians took under control strategical positions, and now the Russians are waiting when the main army of the armed forces of the Russian Federation will get them. This is very important, because if we compare, let's say, if we calculate the distance between, let's say, positions of the sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation to the north of the city of Pokrovsk, and let's say to the village of Mayak, this is probably the village that was confirmed by under control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation several weeks ago, the distance is around 17 kilometers. So it's too big distance. The gap is too huge. And obviously the sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation are not able to move further deep inside of the territory of Ukraine without support, without a normal distance between them and, first of all, FPV drone operators. So you know that sabotage and reconnaissance group can move further in the north and in the western direction, but if they don't have support of artillery and if they don't have support of FPV drone operators of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, their deeper offensive will give no results. So that is why, as for now, it is very critical question for the Russian forces to keep their edge positions with sabotage and reconnaissance group and to shorten the distance between sabotage and reconnaissance group, let's say in the vicinity of Nova Alexandriivka or in the area of the settlements of Novodian and Petrivka, with the regular army, which is moving further and further and further. And once again, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received any changes on the ground of, let's say, of additional progress of the sabotage and reconnaissance group. But during the previous 24 hours, we got changes. That's according to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. The armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to take under complete control the villages of Zatishek and Zapovedna. So the regular army is moving, and the regular army is trying to short the distance to the edge of Russian offensive. This is very important. So that is why we believe that this is exactly what the Russians were focused on during the previous 24 hours. Furthermore, another important thing that the Russians are not able to move forward in the northwestern direction because they still have problems, unresolved issue with Ukrainian positions on the territory of the settlements of Vladimirovka, Shakhova, Sofiyevka, Teretska. So basically, it is very dangerous to move forward in the northwestern direction because if you remember, during the previous few days, the Ukrainians reported that they redeployed the first military army corps Azov in the direction of the Russian breakthrough with the purpose to stabilize the situation. And we believe that Ukrainians redeployed the first military corps exactly in the area of Shakhova, Sofiyevka and Vladimirovka. First of all, the main task of this corps is to stabilize the situation, to become something like anti-retreat units or forces. At the same time, there are very high chances that Ukrainians can carry out counter-offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Novotoretska, Fedorovka, exactly using these routes of counter-offensive. If Ukrainians succeed with this counter-attack, the entire Russian offensive operation deep inside of the territory of Ukraine can collapse automatically. So that is why the Russians are not able to move further in the direction of, let's say, border between Kharkiv and Donetsk region until they resolve the issue with these settlements. And furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the armed forces of the Russian Federation made first attempts to attack the settlements of Sofiyevka and Teretska. So the Russians were attacking this territory from the area of the city of village of Kucherov Yar. So at the same time, the Russians are finishing the clearing of the village, and until they finish the battle for the territory, the Russians can't attack in the eastern direction in full strength. So first of all, they need to secure this area and to destroy a cauldron of the armed forces of Ukraine in this direction, and only then the Russians will be able in full strength to attack in the eastern direction with the purpose to take under complete control Teretsk and Sofiyevka. If the Russians are able to do this, then we understand that Ukrainians who are currently located in Shakhov and Vladimirovka would be forced to fall back. Otherwise, they would be caught in cauldron. So everything is complicated in this direction. Once again, the Russians are trying to improve their positions in this area. The Russians obviously are waiting for Ukrainian counterattack in this direction, obviously, which is going to happen very soon. The Russians understand if they can repel any possible counter-offensive operation of the armed forces of Ukraine in this direction, then they will be able to move further deep inside of the territory of Ukraine. So this is the situation in this area. Once again, the armed forces of the Russian Federation during the previous 2 or 3 or 4 days of offensive operation managed to take under complete control around 200 square kilometers. This is the biggest result since the beginning of 2022, when the Russians just began their offensive operation. The armed forces of the Russian Federation continue their offensive operation in the western direction. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Rodinska, and the sources are saying that the northern part of the settlement is already either contested zone or the territory in the complete Russian control. So Ukrainians, according to information we have, control just the southern part of the settlement, and most likely they will be forced to fall back from this area also in coming days or even maybe hours. So another important thing is that at the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation from the settlements from the N32 road in the northern direction. So this offensive operation have the same task and have the same purpose as the Russian offensive operation to the east, to the west of Teretsk and Sofiyevka. The Russians are trying to encircle the Ukrainians in Shakhov and Vladimirovka and to tighten the news around main evacuation lines. The Russians are pretty sure that they most likely will be able to finish the battle for this territory during the next several days, so that is why they began offensive or intensify their attacks from both directions. Ukrainians need to start thinking about their positions in this area. They don't have much time, 1-2 days, and most likely this territory would be caught in cauldron without any chances for evacuation. So the next 2-3 days are going to be a decisive days for the armed forces of Ukraine, and according to the majority of military experts, the next days are going to be very hot in this direction. The most important reason of this is that on Friday we're going to see a summit between the President of the United States of America and the President of the Russian Federation. So that is why the Russians and Putin himself most likely will begin the biggest attack ever since the beginning of the special military operation, just with one purpose: to get as better as possible positions before the beginning of talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States of America. Now let's move further and let's talk about the southwestern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. The very interesting updates are coming from this area as well. The Russians began actively bombing the southern part of the city of Pokrovsk. In this video we can see how the Russians were attacking the area of this Pokrovsk citadel with multiple launch rocket systems, with artillery, with FAB, and it seems that these attacks first of all look like artillery preparation. Most likely during the next 2 days the Russians will try to attack the citadel itself. Maybe the Russians are going to test Ukraine defense and to understand whether the Ukrainians are still ready and able to hold their lines in this part of the city, or maybe the Ukrainians need just one push which will force them to fall back and to abandon their positions in this direction. Furthermore, and very interesting updates are coming from the settlement of Udachne. If you remember, just yesterday, according to information we have and according to this geolocation, most of the mappers and experts came to the conclusion that the most southern part of the settlement of Udachne was taken by the Russians probably 2 or 3 days ago. Ukrainians were trying to force the Russians to fall back from this area with the use of, let's say, hundreds of drones. They were attacking Ukrainian positions, but the Russians managed to survive during these attacks, and according to information we have today, the Russians continue their offensive. And several mappers reported that by the end of the 30th of August of 2025, the Russians secured around 60% of the settlement. The Ukrainians, according to this information, controlled just the northwestern part of the settlement, and most likely the Ukrainians are going to fall back in coming days and maybe hours. So we see that the Russians are trying to increase their pressure, and the military experts and different sources are saying that the main task of the Russians is to shorten the distance to the M30 road. If the Russians are able to improve their positions and to get as close as possible to the road, this is going to be not just an operational encirclement of the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration, this is going to be a complete and total cauldron for the Ukrainians. Furthermore, the Russians are trying to advance in the direction of M30 road using the long-range offensive, let's say, from the settlement of Udachne. Furthermore, the Russians are trying to attack in the same direction, but this time from the settlements of Zverova and from the settlement of Lyantovichi, trying to do the same to get as close as possible to M30 road and to cut Ukrainians from supplying support somewhere here with FPV drones, artillery, probably with sabotage and reconnaissance group. We understand, and most likely the Russians are planning to cut in cauldron the armed forces of Ukraine before the beginning of summit between presidents of Russia and the United States of America. And we see that the Russians have all chances for this. During the previous 24 hours, once again, the Russians mainly were focused on shortening the distance between their regular army and sabotage and reconnaissance group that managed to infiltrate deep inside of the territory of Ukraine. It is very important to keep the distance, mainly for FPV drone operators. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Constantinivka direction, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. The Russians are bombing and attacking the settlement of Kliban-Byk. During the previous 24 hours, we got another batch of episodes and videos of how the Russians were attacking Ukrainians, mainly those Ukrainians who were trying to escape this cauldron by moving from one building to another. So just chaos and panic we can see from the situation in this area. The Ukrainians are trying to escape this trap that they were caught in during the previous days. Small groups of the armed forces of Ukraine are trying to move from the south in the northern direction. The Russians are bombing and attacking Ukrainians with everything they have, with FPV drones and with artillery. Ukrainians suffer huge losses. Most likely during the next days the Russians are going to launch their major offensive. Maybe this offensive has already begun. Maybe tomorrow this territory will be completely colored in Russian favor, and most likely this territory will be colored in Russian favor in these days. Furthermore, the Russians managed to take under complete control the settlement of Pritekyno and Stupachki, and the area around these territories. So this is, for example, the situation by the end of the 12th of August of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 30th of August of 2025. The Russians took under control both villages, and the most important, the Russians secured an area around this territory. Now the Russians have no problems and no barriers to advance further in the western direction or to advance in the southern direction with the purpose to outflank Ukrainian positions in the area Alexandra Shultina. So there are very high chances that during the next days the Russians will be able to cut in cauldron several Ukrainian groups in the area between the city of Constantinivka and Pokrovsk, to cut them in cauldron or to encircle them without any chances for evacuation. At least this situation concerns, first of all, positions to the west of the settlement of Klishevka between the villages of Pritekyno, Stupachki and Alexandra Shultina. It seems that the next several days are going to be decisive for this group of the armed forces of Ukraine. Either they fall back or they will be caught in cauldron without any chances. Now let's move further. As for the South Donetsk direction, during the previous 24 hours we received lots of videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory, but it seems that the Russians has no priority, that this direction has no priority for the Russians. It seems that the Russians, as for now, have some doubts whether to continue their offensive operation deep inside of the territory of the Dnipro region, but at the same time the Russians are bombing and attacking the edge positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. In case of talks between Trump and Putin fail during Friday of 2025 of the 30th of August, the Russians most likely will launch their offensive deep inside of the Dnipro region as well. As for now, they're just bombing and attacking, and they're waiting for the results of these upcoming talks. As for the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions in the area of Serebryanka forest. This information was provided by different mappers. The Russians continue their bombing and attacking of the settlement of Seversk. Today we got additional batch of video how the Russians were attacking this territory. So as for now, we continue receiving updates about Russian activity, of Russian artillery activity, but as we can see, without any changes on the ground. It seems that the changes are going to happen, but not today. So this is the most important updates regarding the situation on the ground. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that today the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, visited Germany, where he had talks with the Chancellor of Germany, Merz, where they were talking about plan of the United States of America and the Russian Federation. Furthermore, later after this meeting, Zelensky, Merz, and different European politicals made their own statement regarding this possible plan. So, as we can see, according to everything that was stated by Zelensky, Merz, and other European leaders, we see that Europe and Ukraine are not going to accept anything that is going to be probably declared or agreed during the meeting on Alaska. For example, the second person of Ukraine, Andrei Yermak, head of the office of Vladimir Zelensky, called on the partners of Ukraine, mainly the European Union, to ignore any results of the meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump on August 15. So you know that from one side he's saying that to ignore this, but from the other side he is trying to humiliate the United States of America. You know that nothing can be ignored that is achieved, first of all, by the President of the United States of America. And nothing can be ignored, and first of all, you can't talk like this if you understand and if you know that states gives you the majority of weapon and so on. So very interesting and complicated situation, but it seems that most likely the United States of America are going to quit this conflict in coming days. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.